Sometimes, the darkest evil hides behind the most unexpected faces. Take Vincent Brothers, for example, a high school vice principal who was known for his love of children and his reputation in the community. But in July 2003, that image would come crashing down when a shocking quintuple homicide rocked Bakersfield, California. 5 members of a family, including a helpless infant, were murdered in cold blood in their own home. Officers later revealed the crime was driven by pure hatred, and if it hadn't been for something as unexpected as dead insects, justice might never have been served. So, what drove a man so high up in society to sink so low and wipe out an entire family? This is the chilling story of the Harper family, and today we're diving deep into the truth behind the tragedy. Let's start by getting to know Joanie Harper, a woman whose life began on November 14, 1963, in Bakersfield, California. Joanie was the youngest of 5 children born to Ernestine Harper, and she spent her entire life in Bakersfield, a city she would come to love and call home. Joanie's education began at McKinley Elementary, and from there she moved on to Bakersfield High School, where she graduated in 1988. Even in high school, Joanie was already showing signs of being a standout. She was an exceptional athlete, excelling in multiple sports, but it was basketball that truly made her shine. On the court, she was a force to be reckoned with, and her talent earned her recognition throughout her years at Bakersfield High. After high school, Joanie's passion for basketball didn't fade. She took her skills to Southwestern Christian College in Texas, where she earned an associate's degree. But even with her own basketball career ahead of her, Joanie found a new way to stay connected to the sport. In 1994, she made history by becoming the first woman in Kern County to officiate boys' basketball games. Her love for the game continued to grow, and soon she was officiating games for the North Bakersfield Recreation and Park District, as well as for the California Athletic Collegiate Association. Through her years in the basketball community, Joanie became a well-known and respected figure. People admired her not just for her skills, but for her dedication and passion for the sport. But those who knew her best would tell you that while basketball was important to her, her true calling was helping children. Joanie shared this passion with her mother, Ernestine, who had always instilled in her the importance of giving back to others. Ernestine, Joanie's mother, was a woman with a story that spanned more than just her years in California. Originally from Texas, she made the bold decision to move to California in 1961, and by 1964, she had settled in Bakersfield. It was there that Ernestine's passion for helping others truly took root. She quickly became known as a strong, no-nonsense community activist, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for the underdog. And Ernestine didn't just talk the talk, she walked the walk. She fought tirelessly for those who society often forgot, such as the poor, the disenfranchised, and the marginalized. Her belief in fairness was unwavering. Ernestine, deeply grounded in her Christian faith, believed that no matter where someone came from, how they looked, or how much money they had, they all deserved equal justice and respect. Her dedication to helping others didn't stop at her own community, though. As a co-founder of an organization called Extend a Hand for Justice, Ernestine extended her reach far beyond Bakersfield. She traveled to Africa and South America as a missionary, bringing aid, money, and resources to some of the most impoverished communities in the world. Ernestine's heart was as big as it was generous, and it's no surprise that Joanie inherited that same spirit of compassion. Joanie had a deep respect for her mother, and their bond only grew stronger as the years passed. Though Ernestine had 4 other children, her relationship with Joanie was uniquely special. So when Joanie was ready to start her own family, Ernestine was right there by her side, always ready to lend a helping hand. This is where Vincent Brothers entered the picture. In the late 1990s, Joanie met a man who seemed like a dream come true. Vincent was originally from Long Island and had moved to California in the 1980s to attend Cal State Bakersfield. There he earned a master's degree in education and began working his way up in the school system. By all accounts, Vincent appeared to be the perfect match for Joanie. He was charming, ambitious, and had a stable career working at a local elementary school. To Joanie's family, he seemed like a really nice guy, and Joanie quickly fell in love with him. Though Vincent had been married twice before and had a child from a previous relationship, things seemed to be looking up when he and Joanie welcomed their first child together, a son they named Marquez, in 1998. Just 2 years later, in January of 2000, the couple tied the knot, and for a while, it seemed like they were on their way to the picture-perfect life. But as with many fairy tales, things took a dark turn behind the scenes. Vincent began disappearing for days at a time, and when he returned, he was secretive, refusing to explain where he had been or who he had been with. Joanie, heartbroken but sharp, started to piece the puzzle together. She realized the man she had married was betraying her. A month after their wedding, Joanie made the painful decision to have their marriage annulled. But despite the heartbreak, this wasn't the end of their story. According to Joanie's brother, Vincent was still the love of her life, and Joanie wasn't ready to completely let go. She wanted Vincent to be a father to their son, and so the couple continued their on-again, off-again relationship. Then, as if things weren't complicated enough, Joanie discovered she was pregnant again. This time, it was a girl, and Joanie named her Lindsay, and sadly, this didn't stop Vincent from continuing his extramarital issues. By the time Lindsay was born, Joanie's mother, Ernestine, decided to move in with her daughter to help take care of the kids, especially since Vincent wasn't always around. But after being apart for a few years, Joanie and Vincent decided to give their relationship another shot. By the end of 2002, they found out they were expecting their third child together, a surprise that for a moment brought them hope. So, 3 years after their first wedding, Joanie and Vincent secretly remarried in January of 2003. They were starting fresh, or so it seemed. But by April of that same year, things began to unravel again. Vincent slipped back into his old ways, disappearing for days at a time, leaving Joanie feeling more alone than ever. She confided in a friend, telling them that she was afraid Vincent might try to do something drastic to get rid of her. It was a heartbreaking moment for Joanie, who just wanted peace and stability for her family. Despite all the tension, Joanie gave birth to their third child, a baby boy named Marshall, just 4 months after their remarriage. But by the time Marshall arrived, it was clear that their second marriage had already hit a point of no return. Additionally, things weren't getting any better inside the home. Ernestine, who had been living with Joanie to help with the kids, found herself constantly clashing with Vincent. The tension between the two became too much to handle, and eventually Vincent moved out into his own apartment. However, neither Joanie nor Vincent took the steps to officially divorce, but their connection was fading. Because of all the chaos, church had always been a refuge for Joanie and her family. The Baker Street Church of Christ wasn't just a place they went to on Sundays. It was like a second home. Their church family was a huge part of their lives, providing support, friendship, and a sense of community. Joanie couldn't wait for everyone to meet baby Marshall, who was growing so fast. So, on Sunday, July 6, 2003, Joanie, Ernestine, and her 3 children, Marquez, who was 4, Lindsay, almost 2, and baby Marshall, just 6 weeks old, headed to church for the morning service. This was their usual routine. They'd attend both the morning and evening services, a tradition that had become a comforting part of their lives. Little did they know, this seemingly ordinary Sunday would be anything but that. After the morning service ended, the Harper family decided to stop and grab a bite to eat before heading home to rest up for the evening service. However, when the evening service rolled around, the family didn't return to church. At first, people in the congregation thought it was a little odd. They were usually so punctual. But they figured maybe Joanie and the kids were just too tired to come back. After all, Joanie had a newborn and 2 young kids, so it wasn't entirely out of the question that she'd need a break. But then, after the family left church and returned home, no one had heard from them. 2 days passed, and still, no one had been able to get in touch with Joanie or Ernestine. Friends and family members who called them got no answer, and that's when the worry really started to set in. Kelsey Spann, Joanie's best friend, someone she considered a sister, knew something wasn't right. She decided to go over to the Harper house and check on them herself. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. On Tuesday, July 8th, 2 days after anyone hadn't heard from the Harper family, Kelsey arrived at the house. She walked in, expecting to find them maybe napping or busy with the kids, but instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. Joanie, Ernestine, and the children, Marquez, Lindsay, and baby Marshall, were all dead. They had been shot. The house was a crime scene, with .22 caliber shell casings scattered across the floor.
The crime shook our community to the core. It was something that the city of Bakersfield had never dealt with before.
When the police finally arrived at the Harper home, they were greeted by a scene that was nothing short of horrifying. The house had been turned upside down, drawers were pulled open, cabinets were flung wide, and items were strewn across the floor. It seemed like a robbery gone terribly wrong, but something didn't sit right with the investigators. As they carefully examined the scene, they made a chilling discovery. Joanie was lying lifeless, and not only had she been shot, but she had also been brutally stabbed. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a crime of passion. The knife used to stab Joanie was missing, but a closer look revealed that it had been taken from the kitchen. There was a knife missing from the butcher block, and that was a detail that raised more suspicions. The killer had clearly planned the attack using an item from the home, which made the crime feel more personal. The investigators also noted that the killer had entered through the sliding glass door, but curiously, there were no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest a struggle or that the intruder had been trying to sneak in. It was almost as if the killer was invited in, or at least had a way of getting in without raising suspicion. On top of that, despite the mess in the house, nothing valuable seemed to be missing. There was no sign of typical robbery, no electronics, jewelry, or cash gone. So the detectives quickly started to form a theory. Joanie had been the target of the attack. But why? And more hauntingly, why kill her 3 children, including her 6-week-old baby? As the investigation continued, the detectives dug deeper into Joanie's life. They learned she was married to a man named Vincent, and that's when they realized they needed to track him down. After all, he was her husband, and the first person they needed to speak with. They also needed to rule him out as a suspect. So, they set out to find Vincent, but it wasn't as simple as they hoped. It turned out that Vincent wasn't even in Bakersfield when the murders occurred. Vincent had flown out of town on July 2nd, heading first to Ohio to visit his brother and then on to North Carolina to see his mother. So, while the police in Bakersfield were dealing with this horrific crime scene, Vincent was thousands of miles away. When they finally managed to locate him in Elizabethtown, North Carolina, they had to break the devastating news. And when they did, Vincent's reaction was gut-wrenching. According to the detective who interviewed him, he was completely overcome with emotion, inconsolable in his grief. At one point, he even asked for a trash can, fearing he might be sick to his stomach from the shock. However, despite his emotional state, the detectives found it hard to gauge his true feelings. From all appearances, he had a solid alibi. He was hundreds of miles away when the murders occurred, visiting his family in North Carolina. But something about his reaction didn't sit well with the investigators. To truly confirm Vincent's alibi, the detectives went all in, determined to be absolutely certain that he had been in Ohio on the day the murders occurred. They combed through his credit card statements and found purchases made in Ohio on July 6th, the day they believed the family had been killed.
There had been credit card activity on Vincent Brothers' credit card on Sunday, July 6th in Columbus, Ohio.
At first glance, this appeared to be solid evidence that Vincent was where he claimed to be, hundreds of miles away from Bakersfield. His alibi seemed rock solid. After all, Vincent was a vice principal at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California. It was hard to imagine someone in such a professional role being capable of something so horrific. So the investigators turned their attention to the Harper family for more clues. One of the first people they spoke to was Joanie's brother, Eddie Harper. The news came to him in stages, like a nightmare unfolding bit by bit. At first, he received a call from his cousins saying that Joanie and her daughter Lindsay had been shot. Then, a couple of hours later, the cousin called back. But this time, the news was worse. Not only had Joanie and Lindsay been killed, but Marcus and Ernestine had also met the same tragic fate. Eddie's world came crashing down, but it wasn't until the third call that he heard the full, horrifying truth. Every single member of his family, Joanie, Ernestine, Marcus, Lindsay, and little baby Marshall, was gone. Detectives quickly ruled him out as a suspect, as there was no solid evidence linking him to the crime. With that lead fading fast, they began to explore other angles, including whether the Harper family might have had any enemies. The Harpers were known for their activism and generosity within the community, which raised the possibility that their actions could have upset someone. Perhaps an individual felt threatened or offended by their advocacy work. However, when speaking to the family's church members, this theory seemed very unlikely. Everyone who knew the Harpers described them as kind, selfless, and generous. Even Vincent, who had cheated on Joanie multiple times, had been forgiven repeatedly by the family. It didn't make sense that anyone would harbor such deep animosity toward them to justify such a horrific act. Realizing this lead was a dead end, detectives turned their focus back to Vincent. They knew they couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned in a case this shocking. Whoever committed the murders needed to be caught quickly, and every detail of Vincent's alibi came under intense scrutiny. Initially, Vincent's alibi appeared watertight. Credit card purchases placed him in Ohio on the day of the murders, suggesting he was far away when the crime occurred. But detectives weren't satisfied with just the paper trail. They wanted to see for themselves. They obtained surveillance footage from the stores where the purchases were made. And that's when the first crack appeared in Vincent's story. The man seen on camera using Vincent's credit card wasn't Vincent. It was his brother Melvin, who bore a striking resemblance to him in height and build. Investigators brought Melvin in for questioning. At first, he denied using his brother's credit cards, but as detectives pressed him, the truth unraveled. Eventually, Melvin admitted he had indeed used Vincent's cards. Not only that, but Vincent had given him detailed instructions on what to buy. This confession was a bombshell. While it proved that Melvin was the one making the purchases, it didn't necessarily clear Vincent. Melvin claimed Vincent had been in Ohio with him the entire weekend, a point Vincent's lawyer reiterated, explaining that it wasn't unusual for Vincent to lend his card to help his brother. According to his lawyer, Vincent had spent Friday with his brother Melvin and the rest of the weekend with another brother, Troy. The lawyer even claimed that witnesses, outside of Vincent's family, could confirm he was in Ohio the entire time. But detectives weren't buying it. Melvin had already lied during his interrogation, and there was no solid proof, no receipts or records, that backed up Vincent's whereabouts during his supposed visit with Troy. So, the investigators kept digging, determined to figure out what really happened. When detectives took a closer look at Vincent's travel history, the details got suspicious fast. They confirmed that on July 2nd, Vincent flew from California to Columbus, Ohio. Once there, he rented a car and drove to Melvin's house. So far, so normal, right? But when they checked the odometer of the rental car, things got weird. Between July 2nd and July 11th, the car had racked up over 5,400 miles, an absurd number for someone who was supposedly just driving around Ohio. When police calculated the distance, it became clear The car had been driven all the way to California and back during that time frame. This was a huge breakthrough. Detectives now believed they had pieced together what happened. Vincent had flown to Ohio to set up an alibi. Once there, he drove the rental car back to California, committed the murders, and then drove all the way back to Ohio to keep up the appearance that he'd been there the entire time. But even with this theory, the police needed more evidence to nail it down. They teamed up with the Bakersfield Police Department and the FBI to bring the rental car into a lab. Their plan? To analyze the car's radiator for bugs. If the car had really been driven cross-country, the radiator might contain insects specific to California, which would blow Vincent's alibi wide open. And when the results came back, they confirmed what detectives had suspected. Several of the bugs found in the car were species native to California and areas west of the Rocky Mountains. It was damning evidence that tied Vincent's rental car, and likely Vincent himself, to the region where the murders occurred. His carefully crafted alibi was crumbling faster than anyone could have anticipated. But as investigators dug even deeper, they unearthed something even more chilling about Vincent's past. On the surface, he was a respected vice principal with a polished reputation, but behind closed doors, his history painted a far darker picture. In 1988, during his first marriage, Vincent had been convicted of misdemeanor spousal abuse. According to police records, he served 6 days in jail. His wife at the time divorced him, citing his violent behavior. Fast forward to 1992. Vincent remarried, but the marriage quickly soured. By 1993, his second wife filed for divorce, alleging that Vincent had threatened to kill her. The accusations were severe, but they didn't seem to leave a lasting dent in his public image. Then came the incident in 1996, when Vincent was accused of assaulting a coworker. According to the woman's account, she went to his house one day, where he allegedly attacked her, dragged her into a room, and took photographs of her against her will. When she tried to call the police, Vincent reportedly yanked the phone from her hands, preventing her from seeking help. The story didn't end there. The woman claimed that Vincent harassed her relentlessly at work. He allegedly touched her inappropriately, called her at home, and even threatened her. She eventually took a leave of absence, stating that Vincent had created a hostile work environment that made it impossible for her to continue. She tried to report these incidents to the police, but instead of support, she was allegedly met with resistance. Vincent's standing in the community as a vice principal seemed to shield him from accountability. While the school district investigated her complaints and warned Vincent about his behavior, no formal punishment followed. So, after months of tireless investigation, the police were convinced they had their man. Vincent Brothers, the seemingly upstanding elementary school principal, was the one responsible for the brutal murder of his family. By April 2004, they had pieced together enough evidence to take him down. When officers arrived to arrest him, Vincent didn't look surprised, because he wasn't. Turns out, he'd been planning to skip town. He had already started selling his belongings and even listed his house for sale. It was the move of a man who knew the walls were closing in. For those who knew him, this was a gut punch. How could Vincent, the man who greeted kids with a smile every morning, the same guy parents trusted to guide their children, be accused of slaughtering his own flesh and blood? But here's the thing about wolves in sheep's clothing. No matter how pure they appear, the stains of their true nature always bleed through. In January of 2007, the case finally went to trial. It was a spectacle, lasting 4 long months and involving over 100 witnesses. Vincent himself took the stand, denying the charges and maintaining his innocence. The prosecution knew their case was largely circumstantial, but it was undeniably compelling. They carefully outlined their theory, detailing how Vincent had flown to Ohio to establish an alibi, only to secretly drive back to Bakersfield, California, to commit the murders before returning to Ohio. Key evidence, like the odometer readings from the rental car and the forensic analysis of bugs in the radiator, pointed to Vincent having driven across state lines during the time frame of the murders. Prosecutors also highlighted his history of domestic violence, painting a picture of a man with a troubling pattern of behavior. The defense, however, fought back with everything they had. They argued that the prosecution's timeline was not just improbable, it was impossible. A representative from the car rental company testified that odometer readings weren't always recorded accurately, casting doubt on the mileage evidence. Additionally, they claimed there was no direct proof tying Vincent to the crime scene during the murders. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's theory, insisting that Vincent had been in Ohio the entire time, supported by witnesses and his brother's testimonies. But as the trial dragged on, their arguments began to lose traction. After 4 months of testimony and 3 intense days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Despite the defense's efforts, they were not convinced by Vincent's claims of innocence. The circumstantial evidence, combined with Vincent's suspicious behavior, painted a story the jury believed. In the end, Vincent Brothers was found guilty on all counts. In September of 2007, Vincent Brothers was sentenced to death. As of today, he sits on death row at San Quentin Penitentiary, awaiting his fate. It's hard to imagine anyone being so cold and calculating to walk into a home and murder 3 generations of one family. Many people who knew Vincent still struggle to wrap their minds around the idea that he could have been capable of such a thing. Some even question whether the right person was convicted. But for the family and friends of Joanie and Ernestine, justice has been served, and they can take some comfort in knowing that their loved one's killer is paying the price for his actions. As for the motive, it remains unclear. Was it pure hatred for his wife, or was there something deeper and darker at play? Perhaps Vincent was just a psychopath hiding behind the facade of a respected man. But what do you think? Did Vincent kill his entire family, including his children, out of hatred, or is there something more sinister going on? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.